share with you through the course of the next 15 minutes is what I believe has actually transformed and changed my life. Right? So I'm going to start with the word failure. Yeah, failure has very, very ugly connotations with itself, isn't it? So I don't know what comes to your mind. Maybe some of you, when you think of failure, it's a place you clearly don't want to go to. Correct? Any words from the audience? What is coming to your mind when you say the word failure? I've got some up there, but any new words that are coming to your mind?
Opportunity.
Opportunity, all right. You know what? You being very nice, you being the learning kind of person. I'm asking you for the truth, yeah? What is failure really? What is the negative connotations of failure? Disappointment itself? Disappointment itself? Yeah, realization that this can happen to me, right? What else?
The biggest problem with failure is not the failure itself, but the fear of failure.
Fear, yeah, it's fear. Does it remind you of maths or something that you weren't good at school?
Yes.
Yeah, it reminds you of something that you were really terribly afraid of in school? So failure as a word has very many negative connotations, yeah, for each one of us. It's clearly a label we don't want, correct? And therefore, accepting failure is that tantamount to, in most cultures, and especially in ours, to accepting a mistake, accepting a fault, accepting blame, accepting that you haven't got it right. Correct? Yeah? And I think this whole business of not having got it right goes right back to the way in which we raise children, the way we take our children through educational institutions, the way in which we expect them to behave when they come inside organizations. For everything, we've actually oversimplified our lives to believe that there is indeed a right answer. Yeah, everything seems to have a right answer. So if you didn't get the right answer, teacher marks it wrong, and it means that you have a likelihood, the more the number of wrongs you get, you have a likelihood to fail. Same thing continues into your adult years as you go into educational institutions. And the same thing pathetically continues as you bring adults into organizations. There is now a right way to behave, a right way to speak, a right way to deal with people, a right way to align. If you're not aligned, or you're not speaking the boss's language, you're not speaking what it is that somebody else in authority is speaking, then essentially that's seen as a voice of dissent. It's clearly seen as a voice of dissent. Most people believe that anyone who has an alternate perspective in their teams or groups is somebody who's being mischievous, somebody who's not aligned, somebody who needs to be dealt with, someone who's a cynic. Yeah, needs to be fixed, that too. Because it comes primarily from our orientation towards anything that is not correct in our perspective, which is a fault and therefore needs to be punished. And this whole environment which is punitive is something that we've perpetuated through our homes, to the way in which we bring up our children, to the way in which we treat them through educational institutions, even post-adulthood, the way in which we treat them through educational institutions, and pathetically the way in which we treat people when they come inside organizations. There is an unhealthy overemphasis on getting the right answer to the question. And imagine the naivety of all of us to believe that there is indeed only one right answer to the question. And I think that is going to form a significant foundation to what it is that I have here to share with you today. So in a punitive environment, what do you really get? And I'm going to take you back a bit to be able to start looking at mistakes and failure in the context of wanting to build a learning organization. And you know heads of HR and heads of learning and heads of OD. So if you really do want to build a learning organization is one where there is an ability to manage discordant information. Which means that the organization has a culture that is willing to look at what is not working. And that is the fundamental basis of being able to drive any kind of improvement or change within an organization. What is the gumption the organization has to deal with feedback? And to deal with feedback in a constructive way, not in I'll fix you kind of way, but in a constructive way, deal with discordant information, not shoot the messenger of that information. Not be against or target or mark someone who has the feedback to share with you, the bad news to share with you. So the fundamentals of a learning organization is one that has the ability to deal with failure and mistakes. That is the basis of being able to build a learning organization. A learning organization is one where there is a culture of lessons learned. And a culture of lessons learned is built on the premise that you have the ability to understand and assimilate failure in a positive way. Because if you're not able to look at it constructively, which lessons are you going to be able to draw from whatever may have gone wrong in a particular episode? And in most organizations, unfortunately, while we talk about lessons learned, it is exceedingly difficult, especially in a punitive environment and with these negative connotations associated with failure and fault and blame games. It's exceedingly difficult to be able to institutionalize a culture of lessons learned. Lessons learned means I'm accepting that I failed, right? And everyone, when failure happens, what is the most popular question that gets asked inside an organization? Who did it, not what happened? Yeah, who did it? Who did it? Not what happened and how can we prevent this from happening? So fundamentally, the question needs to change from who did it. Yeah, from finding a peg to hang your coat on to moving to a more constructive orientation towards building an organization that reflects and learns, which is to ask the question, what happened? How did this happen? How can we make sure that this does not happen again? Most organizations know what's not working inside their organizations. And the fundamentals of building a learning organization is having the gumption to act on the knowledge that the organization has. But if you live in denial, if you build a punitive environment, if you build a culture where nobody talks about mistakes, where everyone hides their mistakes, when nobody is willing to be able to confront what is not working, how does the organization draw the energies to begin working on what it knows? And the jury is out on what all the organization knows, which it is not really working on, because there aren't really mechanisms for very senior people to let people in power, those who can make the difference, know what is indeed not working inside the organization. Because at the senior most level within organizations, we have people who want to hide what's not working, operating from that childlike naivety of the teacher punishing them for having done something. And I think this is a fundamental truth we got to deal with as learning and OD professionals inside organizations, that there isn't, and therefore there is a need to create a mistake-tolerant culture. So let's talk a little bit more about this. When you have a punitive culture, what really happens? Yeah? In a punitive culture, if anyone accepts failure, it means they're owning to their shortcomings, and it means they're accepting blame. Now when there's no safety and there's no security, if there's no one telling you, I'll watch your back, don't worry about it, tell us what it is that went wrong, how do you create a climate where people feel comfortable to be able to talk about failure? And instead, if you turn this around to create a mistake-tolerant culture, and we talk a bit about how can one create a mistake-tolerant culture, what you have is a sequence of accepting failure, reflecting on what happened and didn't happen, and therefore learning for enhanced results going forward. So the sequence of the cycle that needs to change within an organization is that we're interested in reflecting on what it is that hasn't really happened. And we first of all going to create a culture that enables people to talk about what has not happened. They're not going to get punished for being able to talk about that. And because the organization is truly interested in learning, not fixing the blame, truly interested in reflecting to ensure that it never happens again. We talk about innovation, and Forrest told us a bit about innovation, and those of you not yet driving innovation within your organization will sooner than later be up against the agenda, because every organization today is looking to be differentiated and wants to be differentiated. And how do you get differentiated if you're not driving innovation inside your organization? Here's the sequence for innovation to happen. If there isn't an orientation for active experimentation inside organizations, which means that you allow people to be able to display their curiosity, try something. How many of us have a culture within our organization where you could go out with safety, with psychological safety, of being able to go out and try something without being sure whether it's actually going to succeed? And I think what we've killed is this human energy, this potential of people being able to come up with creative ideas, to be able to try something. And I think therefore being able to create an environment of experimentation is key, to be able to therefore accept failures because you're expecting some of them to not work, right? And lead to reflection, leads to learning, leads to innovation and breakthrough results. So you cannot expect innovation and breakthrough results in an environment where there is no curiosity and experimentation that is encouraged within the organization. Let me give you some examples of organizations who've done this well. And these are some of my real favorite examples, so I'm really delighted to share them with you. 3M, which is obviously an organization that's known and very popular for innovation, essentially they brought out a product in the year 1922. Right? So they came up with a product which is actually sandpaper that could replace a blade inside a razor. Alright? So instead of buying a blade, you actually buy this sandpaper-like thing which you put put inside the blade and you use it for shaving or whatever. It was a miserable, miserable failure. It was a huge flop. They would withdraw the product from the market. And I'm sure the organization incurred huge losses because they must have had a huge marketing budget and distribution budget and the rest of that to get it out to the market. So it failed, they rolled the product back, and years later brought back the same product as waterproof fine-grained sandpaper for being able to polish cars, to be able to use it, to be able to scrape off paint from the car before you actually paint. And this time around it was a roaring success. Now what does this really tell us about 3M? Can you imagine a culture that allows you to be able to keep an idea that has failed incubating in the environment for long enough to be able to reintroduce this now in a new avatar which succeeds greatly inside the market is a great success. It speaks volumes for an organization, the kind of leadership that is actually, which has not rejected the group of people who actually brought out the idea. They've not been sacked, yeah? They've not been used as a peg to hang their coats on. They've actually been used as a group of people who said, well, hang on here, we have an idea. Let's figure what else we can do with it. So maybe not a blade, but there's something else that we can do with this. And come right back in the market with the same product which has a different application. I think that kind of speaks volumes for the gumption of the organization, the courage of the organization, the conviction of the organization to believe in the potential and the power of its people. Here is another example, and before I tell you this, it actually goes back to, therefore, how do you actually create this environment where mistakes, there is a tolerance for mistakes, there is a tolerance for things going amiss, there is a tolerance for things going wrong. And this is a great example. Yeah? Lockheed Martin, the CEO actually walks the floor and talks to groups of people about the mistakes he himself made. Okay, so the regular decisions that he makes on an ongoing basis, some of them he's reflecting on and saying, I shouldn't have done this and I should have done this instead. And it is so, so powerful for people who are in positions of authority to humanize themselves. You know, show their vulnerability to the groups and the troops that they lead to be able to talk about their own mistakes. It is such a powerful powerful manner of driving change. If teachers talked about their mistakes more often, if parents spoke about their mistakes more often, if leaders spoke about their mistakes so often, what a great way of being able to drive change, reflection, and learning inside an organization. So here's a great example of a CEO who actually goes out and talks to people about the mistakes that he's made. And gathers groups of people to tell them about the mistakes that he's made. I want to take you through the spectrum of reasons of failure. Because it's important to understand failure, because some of you are possibly sitting here and saying, but the reason, the raison d'etre of an organization is to become a resounding success, correct? So if we start tolerating mistakes, failures, and the rest of that, it's going to impact our business performances. So how are we going to manage this in a meaningful manner? So we want innovation, and we want creativity, and we want learning, but we want business performance. And I want you to go through with me on the spectrum of reasons for failing to be able to understand that there are as many praiseworthy reasons for failure as there are for blameworthy reasons for failure. So some of the failure is blameworthy. And there is a lot of failure which is praiseworthy. So let's try and look through the spectrum to try and understand the entire spectrum from blameworthy to praiseworthy failure. If there's a deviance from the process, if there's inattention, there's lack of ability, there's a process inadequacy, all great reasons for blameworthy failure. Right? And then you go on from task challenge onwards. And I want you to focus on this, because if you look from task challenge onwards, that's the kind of assignment most leaders are doing. Alright, so task challenge, uncertainty, process complexity, exploratory testing, hypothesis testing. As you start moving in that direction, you'll see that there are actually greater instances of failure, greater chances that you're going to have failure, and therefore that's praiseworthy failure, because you're already in a complex situation, you're trying to get the job done, you are actually likely to fail, and that's proven through research. And I'm actually quoting Amy Edmondson, the professor for leadership development in Harvard Business School, who talks about the fact that failure necessarily rises with uncertainty. Which means if you're talking about efficiency, which is process efficiency, you're talking about safety and quality, you progressively move towards innovation and you move towards discovery, you progressively have greater instances of failure. And you must expect that to happen. And if it does not happen, then there's something strange that's going on. If someone's pretending it's all fine, there's something strange that's actually going on. And I'm going to take you back to a concept that greatly excited me, which is the whole concept of, therefore, how do you create this mistake-tolerant environment by being able to create a culture of psychological safety. And I want you to take that terminology back with you. I think what a great terminology. How do you create a culture of psychological safety? And when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about an environment where you will not be punished for speaking up with your ideas, questions, concerns, or with your mistakes. Can you imagine how invaluable a culture like that is in the medical profession? Can you imagine how invaluable a culture like that is in the aviation industry? If someone can speak up early in the game that there are some errors or there are mistakes, there's something else that's gone wrong, you can prevent major disasters. You can actually save human life. And therefore, creating a culture of psychological safety is key within organizations. Which really happens when you foster an inclusive leadership style that people are encouraged to speak up. Where the psychological price of keeping silent is actually, or the psychological cost of being silent is higher than the psychological cost of being, speaking up and coming out and saying what it is that people would like to say. I'm sure some of you are thinking that if you start creating a culture of psychological safety, how are you going to get performance? Right? What about accountability? If people are just freely allowed to make mistakes, how are we really going to get performance going? And here again, I want you to know that psychological safety and accountability are not mutually exclusive concepts. They can both exist together. If you look at psychological safety and accountability, if you have low psychological safety and low accountability, you have an apathy zone, apathy kind of a culture. If you have high psychological safety but low accountability, then you have a comfort zone. It's a free-for-all, everyone can do whatever and they're not going to get ever penalized for it. If you look at the high accountability culture with low psychological safety, you have an anxiety zone. Are you so surprised now that we have the kind of stress that people are dealing with at work, that all the time we are talking about engagement as HR professionals, all the time we're talking about how do we get people hooked on, how do we get people to perform, how do we get people to enhance their performance. We're operating largely in zones of high accountability with low psychological safety. What else will you get if not anxiety? And therefore we're looking at being able to create organizations that have high psychological safety, high accountability, and therefore learning inside organizations. So what can leaders do to create a culture like this? First of all, to take accountability to frame work accurately. Framing work accurately is very important. And take accountability if that work's not been explained to people well enough. And to be able to really understand the limits, acknowledge the limits of where it is that how far the job can go right, and from where on can the job actually tumble down into some kind of an error that could easily occur. So the more, essentially, the thumb rule is greater the complexity, greater the chances of people committing mistakes. It is not so difficult to understand that as a leader. Embrace the messengers. Anyone who's speaking up and telling you what can go wrong, anyone who's telling you that there is a mistake that's being committed, anyone who's telling you that in the context of working as teams, this is what's going wrong, that's where there's a amber sign, this is where there's a red sign. Encourage people like that and embrace them. It's very, very important to encourage people who can identify potential failure or errors that are already being committed. Listen intently. Most of us don't even want to listen to what people have to say. The minute someone's telling you that something can go wrong, we actually dislike team members of this kind because you think they're dissuading the job or they're dissuading the team from being able to achieve. The voice of the cynic is great because he's giving you an alternate perspective. Listen to him. I think we have a tendency to dismiss off people who are telling you what else could happen, and we kind of consider them to be naysayers, people who may not want to be in the journey. And of course, encourage dissent. It is so important to encourage dissent if we want to be able to create cultures of true reflection and learning. This is my favorite example of success and failure. Yeah, you all know about the Academy Awards, the Oscar Awards. Yeah, so here's Sandra Bullock. She won the Oscars in the year 2009 for a very fantastic movie called The Blind Side. If you haven't seen it, please do see it. It's a very good movie. She won the Oscars in the year 2009 for Best Actress. There is also a category of awards called the Razzies. It's given to the worst actors, the worst producers, the worst filmmakers, and the rest of that. And she also won the Razzies in the same year for her performance in All About Steve. Just look at that. The same person. She succeeded. She was at the pinnacle of success, the pinnacle of failure in the same year. And that is the true power of human potential. I think it is so fantastic that we can succeed. It is so fantastic that we can fail just as badly as we can succeed. This is a fantastic quote, and I thought it is something that I would absolutely want to leave with each one of you. This is Alfred Sloan at a meeting where he spoke to a group of people and they got a unanimous decision. You know, most of us would go laughing all the way out, saying, oh, great meeting, successful meeting, and instead what he said was, gentlemen, I take it we are all in complete agreement on the decision. Then I propose we postpone further discussions on this matter until our next meeting to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what this decision is all about. I'm going to end with that and leave you on that note of dissent is great, it's an alternate perspective. If you're getting too much of agreement, be aware of that, be worried about that, because too much agreement means not great learning. I'm going to leave you with that thought, team up, fail well, learn fast. Thank you.